So, our first subject for today is going to be talking about rhythm. A couple of weeks ago, I started the Music Theory 101 series. We started off with rhythm, talked about kind of meter and subdivision. Then we went into melodies. Then we went into harmony. And now we're going to circle back to rhythm using all the stuff that we've learned so far. And hopefully, as we go, you'll start to see these connecting threads. The main focus of today is going to be on something known as syncopation, which is, for me, one of the fundamental parts of what makes music sound interesting. And that's partially to do with my taste, partially to do with my cultural upbringing, but also to do with the nature of how we tend to think about music, how we tend to perceive it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just grab a drum rack with a couple of drums. This 808 kit should be fine. And I'm going to make something with no syncopation, and then we're going to turn it into something syncopated. So we have this 4-bar section, and I'm going to start off with a nice simple loop. Let's get started. I'm going to put a clap on the 2 and the 4. We're just making a basic house beat kind of thing going here. So I'm going to put maybe a low conga on here and here, and put another one on here and here. Then do the opposite on the high conga. Put these back here. Now I'm going to just have a hi-hat on every single beat. So right now we have an unsyncopated rhythm. I'll give you a hint. It's gonna sound kind of boring. So right now, every single sound we have exists in the context of this metronomic pulse. But as we learned about a few weeks ago, you can have smaller divisions of that steady pulse. Now, I'm going to make one immediate change. I'm going to move all these hi-hats over to 16th notes. Right now the grid is divided into 16, so you have 4, 8, 12, 16 right there for each whole bar pulse. Let's see how much that changed things. I'm actually going to do it in 2 sides. I'm going to move these. This first half is going to remain our unsyncopated groove, and then we're going to flow into the syncopated one. So let me turn this back on. All of a sudden, we're getting some interest there. So, this hi-hat has started to clue us into kind of a secondary, a less important, or an accent pulse. If I go ahead and remove all of these, and we just loop in on this. After a moment, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're starting to feel this as like its own pulse, right? This is the same sort of thing. If I come over here, okay. So, with no context, with no surrounding information, this feels like a nice straight pulse. This is rigid. If we had the metronome playing, like we can do here, it's all locked in. Now watch what happens when I turn on the metronome here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ooh! Now there is this back and forth relationship, right? And if we go ahead and we bring everything back in, we can start to think about how these different pulses play off of each other. And we can even start playing with the pulses in between those pulses. Because if I zoom in here on bar 4, in between this kick, which happens on the metronome, and this hi-hat, which happens on what for now you can start to think of as the anti-metronome or the opposite metronome. It's not really a thing that I've seen referred to in other theory classes, so don't try and like use that as a term, but it is a helpful tool for me to think about what's going on with this relationship, which we'll get into in a second. This is also known as a downbeat. This is known as an offbeat, or a downbeat or an upbeat, but we're gonna get to down and up here. But again, we have these other pulse points right here in between the two. So now I'm just gonna take this conga right here, I'm gonna move it over by 1/16 note, and let's see what this does to our new syncopated pulse. I'm actually gonna move this offbeat for now, just so we can kind of hear where everything is. Ooh! It kind of like anticipates the hi-hat. Like boom, boom. It has this really nice sense of not quite being resolved, but still existing in its own related context to the loop. And you can go as far with this as you want, and we'll get into what that means, but let's take a moment and let's actually start simplifying back down to how we can maybe label a lot of these different pulses in a single bar. When you're listening to just a steady quarter note pulse, right? We instinctively start to organize these pulses into groups of either 3 or 4, depending upon how we're feeling everything else in the music. This pulse right here, I'm going to remove it. I'm going to listen to how the metronome changes for that specific beat. So this pulse that I removed is the one that the metronome plays a different pitch for. This is the starting pulse of this division. We could say that we have started moving and we've ended down on this beat. When we're starting down here, and then we're climbing up to the other beats. So the very first beat in any given pulse, whether you're talking about 4/4 here, or whether we're talking about 3/4, where we be dividing this into smaller divisions, this first pulse is always going to be the downbeat. That's how you begin the phrase. Then you have, after the downbeat, what we would call an upbeat. So down, up, down, up. These other two pulses can also be referred to as down and up. So instead of just having down, up, blank, blank, we have down, up, down, up, down, up. We have this kind of back and forth. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. You could also think of it as strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak. The one that starts is always going to be the most powerful one. It's the one that really announces we are about to enter. And if I remove this last quarter note, you'll see that this first kick all of a sudden becomes even more important. Like that gap, it creates suspense, and then it makes the downbeat even more significant. So as you're planning out any rhythmic ideas, you should ask yourself, how much accent do I want to give to the downbeat? Do I want to land on it, feel like we've come home or really resolve, we're in this place and we're gonna stay here? Or do you want to try and avoid it to give the listener some impression of, oh, things are gonna keep moving, things are gonna keep having this momentum to them because we've missed our landing point, almost like we've overshot it. One way to think about it is like you can have like a strong and a strong weak. Then you have a weak strong, and then a weak beat. This is sort of like the hierarchy of what we could call comfort in the listener's ear. If you are always hitting on strong beats, then the listener is going to feel like things are almost militaristic. It's very marching. Boom, 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 boom. And it has this very plodding, almost elephant-like sensation, for me at least. But if you're only focusing on the weak beats, you're sort of, again, hearkening back to that hi-hat we were doing before, where it's like, well, what about this? What about this anticipation that we're feeling? This is why you'll commonly see like rock and roll and hip-hop drum grooves exist on this downbeat and upbeat, or downbeat and offbeat rhythm. Add in that offbeat hi-hat, because again, if this is down and this is up, how do we classify this thing that's in between the down and the up? We have the offbeat. And this is in the context of a full bar, but this also exists in the context of a single quarter note, where this is the downbeat, this is the upbeat, these become the offbeats right here. And if you zoom in even smaller to like 30-second notes, technically every smaller subdivision has this sort of thing. We have, you know, down, up, and then off right there. But that gets into kind of the recursiveness of tempo. As you start emphasizing different beats, you end up kind of cluing the listener into these different subdivisions. Without this hi-hat, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. With the hi-hat, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have this really almost complex rearrangement of how we feel any given rhythmic pulse. And circling back around to syncopation, you can think about it as trying to clue the listener in to faster or slower pulses of the music that are never directly stated. So let's imply a 16th note rhythm here by having pulses that occasionally hit on one of these. So I'm just going to create this nice little rhythm on the clave, and then I will add it in on the second loop, just so you can kind of hear how this changes our perception of the pulse. Right now, it'll feel like eighth notes. And 2, and 3, and 4. And now it'll be much faster feeling. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. Each successive quarter note has these extra little moments. Like the starting beat has every single 16th note present, and then we have this little gap where it's not, and it kind of lines back up. On a definitional level, structurally, when we're talking about a syncopation, it's where you hit on not a downbeat, and then you avoid the next downbeat. So the hi-hats we have right here are always syncopated because even if I put a hi-hat right here, we're never ever hitting on the kick drum, or the snare drum for that matter, because those are those primary pulses. You can start to play around with this in not just your drum rhythms, but also your melodies. Like, there are some common syncopations that exist based on this extension of a rhythm called a dotted note. If I have a eighth note right here, where there are 8 of these in one bar, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If I want to make this a little bit longer, I can extend its duration by half of the pulse. Half of an eighth note is a 16th note. You can see right there. It takes 2 of these to build 1 of these, so let's extend this by 1. And let's just keep that rhythm going and see what that feels like. I'm going to cut it off here. That's kind of a common thing to do, especially in dance music. You have kind of like this 2-bar syncopation that resets at the end. I'm sure you've heard that dozens of times in music that you like. Most progressive house, honestly, exists on this kind of syncopation. Just as common are dotted 16th notes, which would be this much. This is kind of close to the what we would call the dembo rhythm, which I'll explain in a little bit. Notice how it's starting to get kind of offset. Starts to feel a little bit weird right around here, and that's mostly because of the cross relationship between these things. Isn't it sort of common to use syncopation on kick drums sometimes? Yes. And we'll get to that by taking this exact idea, this dotted 16th note, and I'm going to turn this rhythm into a Jersey club rhythm. I'm actually going to be using dotted 8th notes, I think. Yeah, I'm going to be doing a dotted 8th note for this, but you can find it with dotted 16ths. I'll show you how that works here. So make this 3 16th notes, or 3 32nd notes, and then we're going to cut it off right at the next beat. So we're going to have this shrunken rhythm, which we're doing a similar version of here, and hopefully you can feel the difference between the two. I just go ahead and duplicate this. So we have this bum, bum, bum rhythm right here. Right here. We get rid of the hi-hat. Bum, bum, ba, bum, bum, ba, bum, bum, ba, bum, bum, bum. This is like the Jersey, Baltimore club style of drum groove. Super, super fun, super clubby. I personally love that rhythm. If we say slow this down to about like 108 or so, and then we get rid of the snare, we get rid of this, and we have just a quarter note kick drum pattern, and then we have a rim shot that hits on that same rhythm we were doing with the kick drum on that second bar. Ooh. All of a sudden we're making Moombahton. This beat is everywhere. This is often referred to as the dembo beat, D-E-M-B-O-W. It is an Afro-Caribbean rhythm. You can find it in Arabic cultures as well, and other Middle Eastern cultures. I believe like Turkey uses this rhythm a lot. It's very, very present in a lot of Hebrew or Jewish music as well. This is actually a smaller portion of a larger Afro-Caribbean rhythm known as the clave. And this is hopefully going to be a nice introduction to how the use of syncopation kind of pervades throughout music and throughout cultures. As we circle back around to harmony, maybe not in 2 weeks, but in a month or so, I want to start breaking down sort of the cross relationships between rhythms and pitches. We did kind of a preview of that when we first started this series. There was an Adam Neely video about polyrhythms and pitch and how these things are related, but we'll go into it ourselves in a bit. But this is the classic ba 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 ba. So I think it's this. This is the clave. Clave meaning key. This is everywhere in Latin music, especially Brazilian music. You can find it in a lot of music from the Bahamas and, again, the Afro-Caribbean region. And in pop, no, it's everywhere. It's definitely, because it's a great example of syncopation. Because if we just put a kick drum on every quarter note, let's see how many of these beats land on the pulse and how many of these beats syncopate away from the pulse. And again, I want you to think about this in terms of the sense of anticipation you feel. You're expecting something that has a lot of these faster rhythms present, right? Like, this is what we're kind of hoping to hear, but instead we're missing this one that lands on the pulse and this one that comes after the pulse. It feels exciting. It feels like we're being deprived of something, but not in the sense that we can't understand what's missing. I like to think about syncopation as a way to allow the listener to feel clever. This is something that I actually find is pervasive throughout most of the music that I like to listen to. I find myself personally to be drawn to music that is complex yet approachable. I want something that takes all of these big concepts, all the stuff that's way more advanced than what we're talking about today, and presents them in ways that are as simple as a clave. It is really viscerally simple to understand what's going on with the clave. But there is so much under the hood in terms of how we perceive it that the listener can go, "Oh, wait, I could follow that. I could follow that. I know what's going to happen next. I know how this is going to happen. And oh, wait, oh, it didn't quite happen exactly how I was expecting it, but it's close. So now I can start to adapt to this thing, and I've learned a little bit more about the music." That sensation, at least for me, is what drives me to keep consuming music. For other people, this syncopation, this altered rhythm, allows you to kind of move more fluidly as you dance. Now, if we just have this pulse, you know, we can dance to this. This is fun to dance to. But, ooh, ooh, and you get to move with these things against the pulse. You get to fight against the pulse that's controlling the entire song and make your own path, right? Now, a couple of things on syncopation that I learned in school that might help, especially with melody writing. Now, I want you to think about how this feels right here. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this. Now, I don't know if this is super clear at first, but for me, this first half feels a little bit too plodding. It feels like, oof, we're like landing, we're repeating, and then we're like, okay, we're done. Whereas this, there's a lot more anticipation. This leads us more into the next pulse. And if I move these over by one more, this is actually even more kind of rigid, almost militaristic. And now, move this over one more. Ooh. This again moves us further away. So, the more you hit in on the main pulses here, the more static your rhythms will feel. But as long as you're paying attention to the subdivisions of your pulse and allowing the rhythms to hit closer towards the end of the phrase, all of a sudden it feels a lot better. And I'm just going to show you for completion's sake the difference between these two rhythms at the end. So you can kind of see how all of these different rhythms correlate with the main pulse. And as long as you're not like overburdening the syncopation like this, you're going to be fine. Let's build up a couple of layers of syncopation. I'm going to start to kind of, again, build up all the things we just talked about and create one great combination rhythm. Now, I know that what I want to do here is create the clave rhythm with all of my sounds. But I want to see how many. Now, we just have kind of the downbeat represented. Let's add in the offbeat, or the upbeat, excuse me. But now, let's find some elements that we can use to fill in not every single one of these, but just some of these. Like, let's take the high tom and fill it in on these two beats and this beat. This is our new rhythmic relationship. I'm going to take this mid tom and I'm going to attach it to this first one right here. And I want to do this last one right here. And then we're going to have one more pulse from this low tom, which is hitting on these pulses right here. Let's feel this pulse now. Nice. We can start to remove layers and find that clave amongst all of our toms. Oh, this should be here. So now we're not really overcomplicating anything in terms of the actual rhythm. You can really clearly hear bop, 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 bop. Like, it's clearly defined, but by splitting it up amongst these three lanes, it allows the listener to have a lot of interest in each individual hit. And again, relate that back to the main pulse. So there's a whole world out there to dive into with syncopation. There are things that I probably have not specifically covered here, but I would say don't stress too much about going past kind of these concepts. You'd be surprised how far this gets you. And in a couple weeks, we'll circle back and we'll start talking about polyrhythms in more depth, talking about things like cross modulation, and that will hopefully bring a lot of this into sharper context. The last thing I will say, however, about this is you can turn any rhythm, any solid rhythm like this, into a syncopated pulse in any other rhythm. Not like any other in terms of like it's a universal thing, but if, for example, I duplicate this channel and I go here, move this onto the clave, and instead of having it as a consistent pulse, I'm going to do that dotted rhythm, that dotted eighth rhythm we were talking about earlier. What if we don't reset that? What if we just keep this going over the bar line? About there. So what happens if I move this back one note? Three, four, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So, is it just me, or does this sound like it's a new 4/4 pulse in a different tempo? What happens if I freeze and flatten this? And now, what we're gonna do is I'm going to make sure this is not warped, and I'm gonna just slowly increase the tempo until this clave right here lands right here. Remember, we were at 107 BPM. 107 BPM, right? That's what this is at right here. We're at 143 BPM. Now, it's super locked in. Well, what does that mean for this pulse? Ooh, this has a very interesting new relationship where this slower pulse has 3 hits for every 4 stable pulses on our new foundational rhythm. And it kind of feels still syncopated here, but if we kept things going, it would start to fall off. I'm curious, actually. If we set this on to triplet eighths, if I set this on, or triplet quarter notes, and I make a pulse right here. Maybe triplet half notes, actually. Oh. So, we're doing triplets in the slower meter up against our syncopated pulse that we started with. Again, just to prove this, let me go back, bring everything back to 107. Here, we have not quite 3 pulses for every 2. They reset around here. So we have how many here? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pulses for every 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, interesting. So we have a 6 against 8 or a 4 against 3 polyrhythm presented in our slower tempo with this syncopated rhythm. You can find this for almost every consistently syncopated pulse in any tempo. I actually encourage you to do this more for yourself. What happens if you do dotted eighths, dotted sixteenths, dotted quarter notes? now we're really starting to get into what I feel is like very advanced territory. I just wanted to open your eyes to this, because as you get better, you'll start to realize that like every rhythm is just a 4/4 pulse sped up or slowed down. And it's kind of scary once you realize that. You're just kind of mixing and matching 4/4 pulses in a bunch of different tempos, and that's how you get syncopation. Anyways, I think that'll do it for this topic. Thank you all so much for watching. If you're watching this at home on YouTube, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the little bell thing, do all the YouTube stuff. Tell me what examples of syncopation you find most interesting. You like this content, maybe consider throwing me a couple bucks over on Patreon. You will get these YouTube videos uploaded hopefully early. I need to get back on that. I've been really bad on that. I appreciate it, Donovan. What else? Check me out on Twitter. Check me out on Twitch. It's where I do these streams every Thursday. And thank you for watching. So we will cut the video.